great to see so many colleagues from both inside HMPPS and more widely join us for this event today, which I am very pleased to be hosting and have asked to do that. I just want to do some housekeeping up front before I start to introduce some of the really fantastic speakers we've got today. So we just ask people to keep their cameras off and remain on mute unless you're invited to do so. Otherwise, the presentation element of this today will be recorded and released so that people can kind of share it. But at the point we start our Q&A and discussion later on, we won't record that. So hopefully that helps people feel really comfortable with engaging in that part of the session. Obviously, you can put questions in the Q&A function as we go. I would ask that people kind of think about the presentational element of that and just make sure we do that in a respectful way. And where we're not able to address questions in the context of the event, we will do an FAQ after the event responding to those questions. So as I say, really great to welcome you all today. We really hope that we get a rich discussion about generally raising the awareness of loneliness, particularly for lots of people in the criminal justice system. But we also hope it will give you some useful insight and policy perspectives and some practical advice, both on how we can identify loneliness, but also think about how we work with people to improve their personal situation. So I myself am really looking forward to hearing from our speakers today. So we're going to start today with Marie-Elise from DCMS, who's the Deputy Director for Volunteering and Tackling Loneliness, and has been in a role for a couple of years now. So and has some great experience across government, so in DWP, Cabinet Office, and most recently DFE. I'm an ex-DWP myself, so always great to have someone on board. So Marie-Elise, over to you. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for hosting me, Sarah and colleagues. I'm really honoured to be here talking about tackling loneliness and how that's something that we can approach together, both as a policy and a research question and as practitioners. It's something where the evidence base on what works is evolving. We understand more and more about why loneliness is an issue and why it's a social issue, why it's a public health issue, and why it's a community cohesion issue, not just a question of an individual level transitory happiness or unhappiness. So that's what I'd like to talk about in our time together today. Why should we care about loneliness, if that makes sense, in a context such as the criminal justice system? So loneliness is normal. It can affect any of us at any time of our lives. It probably affects all of us, at least some of the time. And when it's fairly brief and transitory, there's no problem at all. Like, honestly, you experience loneliness when you go through a life transition and you don't have the sort of deep social connections and relationships around you that you did. What you need is social connections that are not just people who care about you or people that you have fun with, but that I guess I would say allow you to make sense of life. There's something about the quality of relationship in there, and loneliness is what we describe it as, it's subjective, and it's when you notice that there's that gap between the social connections that you would want to have and the social connections that you've got. Happens to us all when we go through life transitions. Very unpleasant feeling, and what do we do about it? We go out and we make social connections, and then we get less lonely. Fab. The problem happens in two spaces, one of which is when people get those social connections in ways that are actually really, really unhealthy and make things worse. The other of which is when people can't make the social connections that they need to address their loneliness. So maybe they reach out socially and are rebuffed. Maybe they don't have the skills or the confidence that they might need in order to build those relationships. Or maybe they are just like in situations where they're relatively isolated in terms of the quantity of time that they're able to spend with other people who are able to form social interactions with them. And in these cases, loneliness that gets like prolonged, so maybe you're experiencing that you're feeling lonely always or often for, months, 3 months, 6 months, shading onwards, that's what we call chronic loneliness, and it's what starts to be really problematic. Why is it problematic? Why is it just not unpleasant for a slightly longer time period? No, it's actually problematic in a public health sense and more widely socially, because loneliness, when it gets chronic, is really bad for you. It's actually about as bad for you as smoking 15 a day or obesity, both of which we think of as really major like public health questions within the criminal justice system or any other parts of like public service and government service. And another thing that we know about loneliness and why it's bad for you is that it has a two-way relationship with your health. Your physical health, yes, and in particular your mental health is where the evidence is. So being chronically lonely, so always and often lonely for a long period of time, gets bad for your health in the same, like smoking or obesity does. It also really increases your risk of mental health problems. And that works both ways. If you've got mental health problems, you're much more likely to be lonely. If you're chronically lonely for a long period of time, you're much more likely to get mental health problems. And those two things, they're cyclical, they go up and down together. And when we're talking about the population in the criminal justice system, we know that it's a population that is particularly likely to experience loneliness and to experience that in chronic and problematic ways. So we know that younger people are more likely to report that they're feeling lonely. We know that younger people are more likely to go through those life transitions, which I described as trigger points for loneliness. And we know that the criminal justice system has a population which has quite a large proportion of younger people who are experiencing, both in their wider life and in their intersections with criminal justice, a lot of transitions. So you've got a population who are more likely to be lonely, who are also more likely to be from deprived families or deprived areas of the country, which we know is associated with greater degrees of loneliness, and which is also associated with contact with the criminal justice system. So I believe the research is that the imprisonment rate for the 10 most deprived local authorities in England is something like 10 times greater than that of the 10 least deprived local authorities in England. So we have here a set of people who are in contact with the criminal justice system who are really likely to be lonely. They are susceptible to loneliness through other life factors that they're experiencing. They're highly likely to have a mental health condition already. I understand that the majority of those in prison have at least one mental health condition. So it's a fair assumption to make that people in prison or otherwise in contact with the criminal justice system are probably going to be experiencing loneliness, and it's probably going to be verging on that point where it gets to be problematic. So we certainly see this in research, I understand, from the Prison Reform Trust. There's research on a long stretch report shows how prisoners serving long sentences sometimes are expressing feelings of like really very profound isolation and loneliness arising from not having that outside support. They're expressing anger, helplessness, mistrust, and resentment. But I would say that as a starting guess here, actually, you would probably, if you asked other people in the system as well, you would probably find very high degrees of loneliness, including among people who are, not necessarily in having long sentences. So that's the why. We care about loneliness because it's a public health problem on a par with smoking or obesity. We care about it in the criminal justice system specifically because you're dealing with a population who are very likely to be experiencing loneliness and are very likely to be experiencing it in problematic ways, which is reinforcing their existing mental health conditions and vice versa. So what do we do about it? Well, the research based on what solves loneliness is evolving. But what we hear from expert practitioners in this field, both in the UK and abroad, is that it doesn't take much. Practitioners talk about activity-first approaches. They say it's nigh on impossible to get people who are chronically lonely and have been rebuffed socially and lost confidence in themselves to come along to a group to talk about feeling lonely. You can just feel the cringe, right? But what you can do is get people together around a board game, a ping pong table, table football, sports, whatever it might be happening in a context, and gently edge people into considering what their feelings might be and what they might do about it. Similarly, actually, even if you don't edge people towards thinking about their feelings and how they might address their own loneliness, what you're doing in what we call activity first approaches is giving people really low stakes, frequent, brief chances to practice their social skills and to practice them face to face in contexts where if they build their social connections, those social connections are more likely actually to be healthy and helpful. So then, people are not tumbling down a rabbit warren of toxic online content, for example, which is one of the themes around loneliness that is particularly in the news over recent weeks. So activity first approaches, are valued by practitioners in this spaces. Another thing that I hear from practitioners is that redoing introductory activities is a really good thing. So if you think back to your own school days or the icebreaker in a workplace or things like that, the getting to know you type activities that generally just happen once at the beginning, practitioners talk about actually, how about if you did that not just at the beginning, but every so often? Every 6 months, do the kind of things that get people talking to each other, introducing themselves. What you're doing is you're fostering people making low-key practice in social connection. You're fostering people reaching out to a social connection they might not have made before. So what we have here in policy terms is an emerging evidence base and practitioner sort of insight into what works. Basically, really simple, cheap things that get people practicing their social skills around an activity. Informed by the assumption that in a population like the ones that you're dealing with in HMPPS, people are pretty likely to be experiencing loneliness at problematic levels. And an understanding of why it is that loneliness matters at a public service level and across government. It's because of that bi-directional relationship with mental health. It's because of the risk that chronic loneliness poses to your physical and mental health. And to complement these two sorts of things about the why and the what, we also work in DCMS on the evidence base around this piece. So I'm going to hand back to Sarah in a moment to introduce my colleague Keming, who is a researcher working with us on loneliness, what it is and isn't, what works to address it. This is work that we've been doing across government for around 5 years now to build the evidence base on loneliness. So that we can collectively be friends to our successors in all of our current roles and understand better and better over time what it is that works to address loneliness, why, how should we collectively go about it, and equally what doesn't work. So I would invite people who are very interested in taking this further to consider joining our Tackling Loneliness Hub. It's a website online. We can circulate the link along with the recording for professionals who are interested in questions of best practice around tackling loneliness, to connect with each other, read research reports, things like that. It's an evolving picture. I don't have all of the answers, but I think that we have a compelling picture together of why it matters and how we can just begin to chip away at doing something about it. I'll hand back to you, Sarah. I think you're on mute, Sarah.
Great. That's going to be recorded forever as well. So thanks. I found it hugely interesting, and particularly your insight about trying to get people to talk about loneliness in groups. It made my toes curl at the thought of it, never mind theirs. So yeah, that I'm not great at kind of structured events myself either. So yeah, but really great food for thought. And you've already mentioned Keming, who's also kindly joined us today, who is an associate professor of sociology at Durham, and is conducting research, as you said, about loneliness, and you've been doing that for more than 15 years. So I'm sure you've got some really great insights to share with us. So thanks for joining us today, Keming, and over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. It's an honor to be here, and Maria-Alice has already given you an excellent introduction to loneliness. So let me give you a mini introduction to loneliness from an academic researcher's perspective. I've organized my presentation in the style of Q&A. So here are the questions. Next slide, please. So obviously, the first question is, what is loneliness? It is, however, important to consider what is not loneliness at the same time, because many times loneliness is confused with other concepts or words. You may think the importance of loneliness is obvious, it's unpleasant anyway, but sometimes it is even argued that loneliness could be a good thing. So here, I would assume that when we talk about loneliness, we assume it is not something we would like to experience. It is because academic research has demonstrated that loneliness is truly detrimental to public health that has become so important, as Maria-Alice has already illustrated in her speech. But to tackle loneliness, we need to know who are suffering from it. So the next question is, who are lonely? So we can do something to help them. We need to know who they are. And lastly, the last question is you can say is a sub-question of the previous one. I have added to the list because it is a more effective approach, in my view, to identifying who are the most vulnerable to loneliness and understanding why. So I'll explain a little bit of that concept, intersectionality. Next slide, please. So loneliness is a word of daily language. It's not really a jargon. So we should all know what it means. But that doesn't mean that it's so always easy to define something that you're familiar with, right? In the Oxford English Dictionary, the definition includes the word want, which indicates a need, a desire, because something is missing. That something is missing is a relationship to other human beings. The word dejection also suggests that it is unpleasant feeling. So this common language, daily language definition is broadly consistent with the definition of loneliness that has been most widely cited. That is the Perman-Pavlov definition published in early 1980s. So this definition, academic definition, has two important components. The first one is that loneliness is unpleasant or even harmful. The second component is that it is unpleasant because we are not satisfied with some aspect of our social relations, either the quantity or the quality or both. Next slide, please. So here comes perhaps a not so obvious question. What is not loneliness? Right. To understand something, we better understand what something opposite to it. So what are the words and terms that are related to loneliness, but actually do not actually mean loneliness. Right? Given the limited time, I only give you one example here. That is, aloneness is not loneliness. A person who is alone may be lonely, but maybe not. Right? So you cannot approach someone sitting on a bench in a park alone and say, you must be lonely, so please talk to me. I have heard, however, many times that people use the word alone to mean loneliness or so lonely. That they say, I'm so alone, I feel so alone. Next slide, please. So the next question is it really important? Because I ask this question is that it is not obvious to many people that loneliness is a serious issue because it's part of daily life, it's a common feeling, right? It comes and goes. Some people even argue that it is a good thing. But we argue that loneliness is really a bad thing for three reasons. First of all, as Marianne already mentioned, that it affects your health, both physical and mental health. It is tightly related to cardiovascular diseases, dementia, depression, anxiety, hopelessness, and then also unhealthy behaviors such as smoking, drinking, and overeating. And all these health issues will add costs to a health system, to NHS, right? So that is obvious when you got ill, and then you put costs to the NHS. But also it will lower our productivity. When employees are lonely, there's a serious research on loneliness at work. So people will become less energetic. They don't cooperate together very well. And more importantly, I think what has been less researched is the social consequences of loneliness, such as broken families, broken social circles, disconnected communities, right? And some young people joining street gangs or even radical groups. So these are all more important consequences of not only health. Next slide, please. It is also important to specify what kind of loneliness we are talking about, because not all types or levels of loneliness are equally harmful. At the moment, researchers agree that there are three types of loneliness: emotional, social, and existential. Emotional loneliness refers to loneliness after losing one intimate relationship, such as spouse, parents, very close friend. Social loneliness refers to the loneliness that due to disconnection to a certain social network or community, such as I know children, for example, not fitting into a peer group at school, a person of LGBT plus not being accepted by family or community, immigrants not feeling belonging to the host nation, and so on. So existential loneliness refers to the loss of meaning of life, hopelessness, or disconnection to humanity as a whole. It is also important, as Maria Alice did in her speech, to distinguish between transient from chronic loneliness, because loneliness only becomes harmful to health, as researchers demonstrated, to only when it becomes chronic. That is, either you frequently feel lonely during a particular time frame, or your loneliness lasts for quite a long time, right? So in my book, Loneliness, a Social Problem, I proposed to classify loneliness in three aspects: intensity, frequency, and duration. Right, so it is in these senses, researchers have invented a series of measures and scales, such as the UCLA or the Young-Gilbert loneliness scales, to measure how lonely people are. Next slide, please. So, who do you think that are most likely to suffer from chronic loneliness in the UK? I will give you a very small quiz here to, given the limited time. Next slide, please. That is the first question. Right. The statement is that people in the 65 to 74 age groups are the most likely to experience loneliness. Is it true or not? Right. So I wouldn't ask you to raise your hand or take counting how many people. Actually, that is not true. Well, I can see some people already said true. That's not true. because studies have shown that actually it is the late teenagers and young adults who are the most vulnerable to loneliness. Next slide, please. The next one is you are 5 times as likely to experience chronic loneliness if you have disability or chronic loneliness. Is it true or false? Yeah, I can see some people already said true. Yeah, it is true. This is because their disability has made people find it difficult to communicate with other people because they become a different person after becoming disabled. They feel different from others in their life in a very negative way, and they find it very hard to make themselves feel like they are the same as the others. Next slide, please. So my argument in the past 2 or 3 years is that paying attention to one particular attribute, such as age or disability, is not enough. For example, although adolescents and young adults have the highest rate of prevalence of chronic loneliness, the majority of them are still not chronically lonely. So we need to bring in one or more attributes in order to have a much more accurate profile of who they are, such as gender, sexuality, ethnicity, and so on. So that's why I'm promoting and developing an intersectional approach to identifying the most vulnerable. That is by combining several social demographic attributes at the same time. It sounds intuitively sensible because we carry those attributes all at the same time as human beings. But in terms of practice of research, that is a very challenging task to do. Next slide, please. So if we apply this intersectional approach to the theme of this workshop here, my question to you is, what are the intersectional attributes of incarcerated offenders and their family members? I focus on them because I realize that those are not only people in the criminal justice system. We should think about guards, supporting member staff, and so on. But let's focus on them and then try to figure out what kind of people are they, what kind of characteristics that they carry, and how those characteristics are linked to loneliness and their experiences both before, during, and after their life behind the bars. One practical issue is that the data about loneliness are normally collected from sample surveys, such as the community life survey sponsored by the DCMS. But the target population of these surveys are people living in private homes. So the incarcerated offenders have no chance to participate in these surveys. So my conclusion is that we need more specially commissioned studies to answer this question properly. Yeah, back to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Keming, and that was a useful point to maybe for us to pick up later about how maybe we can support you in thinking about how you can get that research done. But again, fascinating stuff. Certainly getting my brain thinking a bit differently. I'm also very grateful to you all for keeping us bang on time as well. So now I'm going to introduce a colleague from HMPPS, Tammie, who I'm very grateful has also joined us today. So Tammie's currently a senior policy lead within the community sentence management. So worked in probation for over 20 years and has looked at the cause of offending and antisocial behaviour in adults and young people. So has lots of frontline practice experience to bring to bear in her thoughts today. So Tammie, thank you very much, and over to you.
Thanks for the introduction. I almost forgot I was talking because I was so listening to that so much, so thank you. So I've been asked to speak today from a practice lens, and I've deliberately selected this picture because I think when we think of loneliness, our go-to tends to be an isolated figure, but I think the reality is really different. Next slide, please. So loneliness isn't a count of the people you've got in your life. It's someone surrounded by lots of people can feel really lonely. It's much more about that sense of connection with people and your community. Next slide, please. And again. I like an animation, sorry. Given it's about how you feel, it's really important to be aware of all the things that can contribute to loneliness. And that includes a situation you're not familiar with. So that could be triggered by specific events like changing your job, moving somewhere new. So that transitions that Marie spoke about. You're feeling different to those around you, maybe mental health, maybe trauma, or the move. So you kind of really feel like you lack that sense of belonging. Or maybe you just lack that deep connection. That could be about relationship status or family circumstances. Or it might even be about you don't feel like your relationships progress from those like associates and acquaintances into really close, trusting relationships. And maybe that's because you think, oh, people are busy living their lives, or maybe you've got different priorities, or people are in different life phases that you're surrounded by. Or maybe it's that you don't trust those people around you to kind of have your best intentions at heart, so you never really let them in. Perhaps someone really close to you is no longer in your life for whatever reason. And I think pets, animals can be people's world. So I know if I lost my dog, I'd be mortified, and I think I would feel isolated, I think. On top of that, you've got the weight of expectation and comparing ourselves to others, especially with social media. Everyone wants to put out there that they're living their best lives, don't they? And that can feed into loneliness. And I think that's also changed how we communicate with each other. So face-to-face interactions can feel overwhelming. I think they're all factors that we could probably all relate to. But for those on probation in prison, those factors may well have resulted from involvement in the justice system or potentially trauma that aren't their choices. And I've given some examples here. I want to bring your attention just to a couple. So there's entering a prison. You might end up being miles away from home, and it might be that nobody can visit you. And I think one that we don't often think of is that shared history with someone. So imagine trying to make a deep connection with someone, but maybe you've spent a long time in prison. How do you talk about your history? You know, part of making a connection with people is you connect over like moments, you connect over music, values, experiences, culture. But how do you do that if you've got a gap in your life? And also there's that whole, when do you tell someone, and how do people manage the risk that carries for them? I think also people might no longer be in their life either because of the offending behaviour, or maybe probation or courts have put no contact conditions in with people, maybe to protect them as a victim or potential victims, or maybe someone offends together. So that can be quite difficult. Next slide, please. So lots going on for individuals we work with, and we need to be mindful of that. But before I talk about what we can do, I'm going to share a couple of embarrassing moments from my career when I haven't put that at the foremost of my thoughts. So I had a chap who wrote to me really regularly from prison, really thoughtful, considered letters, deep, long, and I would write to reply on my to-do list. But if I'm honest, I frequently deprioritise those because he was in custody. When he was released, he had a really, really open conversation with me about the impact that had on him and how it made him feel. He felt isolated, he felt neglected, he was worried about his release and who I was and what I was going to do. So that was a massive lesson for me there. And another occasion, I was covering duty last minute, and I just remember seeing this bloke, and I started going through my paperwork and suddenly just looked at him and was like, oh my God, he just looks shocked. He looks like he doesn't even know what's happening. So I was just going through the motions. So I put my paperwork down and just had a conversation with him. Next slide, please. I think that really helps to illustrate that relationships are key to supporting people. And that's both in terms of promoting that sense of connectedness, but also in supporting change. And that's a key principle in desistance practice. To do that well, though, to Keming's point, you've got to be responsive to the individual circumstances, their protected characteristics, how they feel about where they are, who they have in their lives, who they want in their lives, and what resources they've got to get them there. Next slide, please. I really like this cartoon by Gary Trudeau. It's called Street Calculus. So I would encourage you to go and look it up. It explores the way that our identity impacts on how we perceive and then how we interact with people around us. So you go through these mental calculations when you meet someone based on factors like their race, gender, age and appearance. And those snap judgments can really influence how we approach and how we interact with others. And then if you layer on top of that the experience of someone who's been involved in the justice system, next slide, please, those labels will inevitably make someone much more hesitant to pursue social interactions. Next slide, please. And I think you might have to click again to make it move, unless people are going to feel seasick. So So what can we do? We've got to work in a way that acknowledges these challenges and understands people's circumstances, both in terms of the push and pull of offending behaviour. I loved the fact Maria talked about transitions, because I see transitioning from offending like walking over a bridge. You don't know what's on the other side. You don't know how people are going to interact with you on that side. So whilst this side of the bridge has kind of brought its challenges, they're known to you, so they're not as scary. So as practitioners, we've got to work in a really relational way to build motivating and meaningful relationships, so people understand how to cross that bridge. They need to know what they've got that can help them, and then we need to help them build other skills so they can access resources to support them make that journey. Next slide, please. So those same principles that support people feel connected also promote desistance or crossing the bridge. That includes tailoring your support to their circumstances, which I've mentioned, but that's about building on people's strengths so you can promote a sense of self-worth and really empower them to believe in themselves, and that will help with loneliness as well. Treating people in a humane way with care and respect, and employing that procedural justice. Enabling people to recognise and then supporting them to address those cognitive distortions. What I mean by that is those things that people say to themselves in their head: I don't belong, I'm just an offender, I've never been any good, why would they want to a relationship with me? And then supporting people to develop and then use social skills to make connections. I wrote it down, the activity-based approach. So some things I've used before is you might start small with practicing in sessions and then encouraging someone to move from the self-service to the actual till where they speak to someone. We want people to make connections, known as social capital, obviously aware of public protection issues, but the idea is you help people to make bridging capital, so that's where they make relationships beyond their current circle, so that helps them to cross the bridge. We as a profession can use like linking capital, which is where you use the resources that we've got that might not be accessible to someone to branch out their network. So that might be referrals, like mentoring. And then the idea is you want to get to bonding capital. So that's the glue that holds a group together, where they feel a really strong sense of belonging. And then finally, recognise and celebrate progress. Next slide, please. I think connections are important for desistance, as I said. Those in prison who receive family visits are 39% less likely to reoffend, and the research suggests that for women they're even greater of significance. Social roles also play a really crucial part in supporting change, providing a sense of purpose, belonging. Relationships and roles like that provide encouragement, accountability, and are really vital for sustaining that change. And specific roles like employment can really help in terms of stability and routine and constructive activities and connections. I remember a young bloke I worked with who got a job. He was really isolated, he hated social interactions, and he started stacking shelves. And he said he hated it because people tapped him on the shoulder and said, come on, where's this, where's that? And for the first year, he just told everyone he was new there and didn't know where anything was. But after a year, we actually got to speak to people. But don't just, sorry, next slide. Don't just hear it from me. I really encourage you to go and look at the wealth of information out there where people are sharing their stories about what made them feel connected and what helped them to desist from offending. I've put a shot here of a podcast called Life After Prison, and in this episode Jules shares who's changed her life. Spoiler alert, it was a PI in prison who just spoke to her and made her a brew. Many of them talk about the importance of relationships, sometimes one specific person at the right time who treated them humanely and really helped to propel that momentum to change. And I'd just like to leave you with a thought from one of my favourite letters. I wrote to a chap in prison to say I was moving on and I just wanted to kind of wish him well for the future. And he wrote back and said something like, I'd like to say I couldn't have done it without you, but the truth is I was ready to change. It was just nice to have you along the way to remind me of where I was heading, especially during the difficult times. And I think that sums up probation for me. Okay, so I'm handing back to Sarah now. Thank you.
Thanks, Tammie. Really, really inspirational thoughts there, and good to hear employment mentioned, because we've done quite a good job of increasing employment outcomes, and as you say, that's kind of really important to help people build those social connections. And I know prisons are thinking about some things like, you know, getting people to start a park run in prison so they can kind of go and feel that's a kind of normal thing for them to do once they're outside. But yeah, really, really interesting and thought-provoking as well. And to continue with that theme of great speakers, I'm very lucky as well to be able to welcome Sarah Jane and Jazz from Recoop, who are actually in the Recoop team in the Northwest, and being a Blackpool lass, that it's always great to welcome people from the Northwest. So and they're talking about their programme, which has made a significant impact in supporting vulnerable prisoners. So it provides peer support and helping those who are isolated, struggling with mental health, or facing the challenges of reintegration. So really grateful to have you both here today, and over to you guys to tell us about the great work that you're doing.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks so much for having us. There's been so much great information already. Can I have next slide, please? So a little bit about Recoop and what we do. So we've been working for over 15 years, pioneering new and effective ways to support older prisoners and ex-offenders. We generally work with the 50 plus population, but we also work very much with the vulnerable population, and that can mean the younger people that are coming in there as well. And we do see a lot of mental health issues. At the moment, we're delivering our services in 16 prisons across the UK, and social prescribing is a key focus of ours. Our main focus really is the buddy programme, which is a peer support model. One of our colleagues won an MBE for doing the work in this peer support model, and there's been some fabulous work that's come from that. Next slide, please, Sarah. So again, just reiterating some points. So what we see when prisoners come into reception and induction, again, we have fear, misery, despair, loss of control, no way out. There's fears that they will die in custody, and that can be a very real situation, to the point where we do train our prisoners up to deliver end-of-life care. Mentioning how important pets are and things like that, we've managed to make arrangements so that we've had pets coming in for people on end of life, and we work very closely with things like therapy dogs as well, because it's such a great way of building a connection that people have with animals. So other things: panic, vulnerability that we're looking at in custody. So what we do mainly is that when we've trained our prisoners up to become what we call buddies, and we have them in reception at the first point of contact at induction, for the people coming in. So it gives them a sense that they're not completely alone. They've got someone there that's more like a peer that can guide them in a trusted role. And again, day-to-day life, we see hundreds of people. Again, they're in the same boat, but they still feel physically alone. You would think that they would feel less lonely with that, but we don't see that. They're trying to maintain relationships. Sometimes there's a lack of outside support. We see relationships break down as they've entered prison. And we see a lot of things like debt, bribes, and falling victim to bullying, especially if they are vulnerable or older. So again, we were just having a look at the impact, and like you guys have mentioned before, chronic stress, loneliness increasing the risk of heart disease and stroke. We have people with poor sleep or sleeping too much, which in the prison estate can mean that they can't hold down jobs very well. We see weight fluctuations, things like that. Accelerated aging, early mortality. We saw this hugely over the COVID pandemic within the prisons. So people were facing something called deconditioning. So if they had pre-existing conditions, the conditions like dementia were speeding up very quickly. And that was really due to a lack of interaction and that kind of social support as well. And again, some other things, you know, self-harm and suicide. Some of the self-harm we see is overeating, for example, or self-isolating. And we also see things like sensory deprivation, especially when people are put in segregation units due to behaviour that has come from maybe a mental health problem. We've dealt with people having hallucinations and getting very aggressive and irritable, where we've had to discuss things with prison staff. Next slide, please, Sarah. So the buddy programme is absolutely fantastic. Our buddies are trained to national care standards, meaning they have a duty of care. They're cleared by security, and we work with them very, very closely. Not only do they help the clients that we take on, but it actually helps the prisoners themselves who are feeling lonely. So some of our buddies who have had no purpose, and I think this is a huge topic, having purpose, their mental health has improved. And going back to what Keming was saying before, we've had surveys in there that we base on the Warwick-Edinburgh mental health scale, measuring how people feel after they've been through training and become a buddy, and also our clients and how they feel being supported by buddies. So it's a two-way street, really, with looking at purpose and isolation and loneliness. So really what our buddies do, they support people who have a health and social care need, and we work very closely with the social work team to develop the support plans that the buddies carry out. And it can be very simple. It can be meal collections, help with cleaning a pad, enabling people, everybody's wheelchair trained, they encourage personal hygiene, but the in-betweens are so much more that we do. So we are reducing social isolation. So we'll do on-wing activity, and our buddies are fantastic with encouraging people to come out of the cells step by step, come to a coffee morning, play a game of Scrabble. We run some of the activity hubs and Cameo, and we do things like exercise in cell, exercise programs, mindfulness, distraction packs. And one of the main things that we do look at now are welfare checks and advocacy, because just having a check-in and a hello and building that connection and trust is going a long, long way with people. Next slide, Sarah, please. So every single day we'll get case studies coming out, and it's absolutely brilliant to see. So a couple of them just very quickly. We had one client, he was in his 50s, he was on ASD, very isolated, struggling with emotional regulation. And I remember this gentleman, he was very up and down, very aggressive, irritable, very sad, depressed, and he was at risk of losing his job because of the conflict that he was having with people, because of this feeling of not connecting with people. So what our buddies did was they helped to identify triggers, and by doing, there was a way that they did this. We have a form called This Is Me. So it's very person-centered, and they work very closely to try and identify what really were his triggers. For example, it was being forced to communicate verbally. So our buddies developed some communication cards so he could just point to them at first before he had to move on to do the verbal cues. And we work closely with prison staff to educate them about the autistic spectrum. And it was filled with positive encouragement as well. So the outcome of this was that the client eventually could manage his own emotions better. He understood his own triggers, which sometimes is quite difficult to do with people. He maintained his job, which meant he had some money coming in, and he developed a few positive social relationships, which is brilliant. And then finally, client 2, he was a bit later on, he was a bit, older, the other client. This client was self-isolating, he was self-harming, he was binge eating, he had diabetes. We could advise him that this wasn't the best way to do. He was eating a lot of junk food, and he was very depressed. He was self-isolating because of that. Again, the buddies social prescribed to him, so we've got something called On Track, where you get a stepometer and you get to do a big in-cell hike throughout the UK, and he quite enjoyed doing that on his own at first. They give him advice and resources for healthy eating, but what really did it was prompting him to come out and have a tea and coffee and have a speak to other people about this. Once he started feeling more positive, the self-isolating reduced. He was attending on-wing activities. Some of that was bingo that the buddies set up. Again, Dominoes, things like that. And then his confidence was growing, so he was collecting his own meal. No longer borderline diabetic after about 6 months. He worked on that. He wasn't binge eating and making more informed choices about food, because it was a lack of education as well, that he didn't really know about all of this. So it's really exciting to see what the buddies do, and every day we get these stories, which is absolutely brilliant. But I would say it's really to do with people having a purpose in life, I would say. I want to pass you over to my colleague Jazz for the next slide. Jazz, I think you're on mute.
We've only been doing this a few years. My name's Jazz Singh. I'm the founder and CEO of Empowerability. I'm a board trustee at Recoop, along with board trustee at Spark Inside. I also have lived experience of being in prison, and I have exactly 30 days left of my probation to go before I complete a 6-year sentence. And for me, prison isn't just about confinement. It's about isolation. Loneliness in prison is more than just a feeling. For me, it's a slow erosion of the soul. It was a daily battle against something that was like a deafening silence, where I had an unshakable sense of being forgotten. And I want you all to imagine losing your ability to hold your own children, if you have any, or to hear your mother's voice without a time limit, or to sit with a friend without barriers between you. Imagine being surrounded by hundreds of people and the noise and the cacophony, but feeling completely alone. Because that's the reality for so many humans behind bars. And that's where loneliness becomes a second punishment. The pain of separation, from the moment you're locked up, you're cut away from everything familiar. From your parents, your children, your friends, people who were once only a short walk away or a call away are now becoming distant memories. Phone calls are expensive, visits are infrequent, and the outside world moves on without you. Relationships naturally strain, love fades, and sometimes the letters stop coming. I remember calling home and hearing my daughter's voice change over the years. I left her as a toddler, then she became a little girl and now a teenager, but I wasn't there throughout that whole period. I was just a voice on the phone. And eventually, I wasn't even that. Isolation inside the walls, even within prison, despite the population crisis, loneliness thrives. Trust is scarce, and showing vulnerability can be a very dangerous thing to do. Some people spend days, weeks, or even months barely speaking to another human. Their only company, the walls closing in around them. Even though they might be living with somebody as a cellmate, they actually live in solitary confinement, often justified as protection or as a discipline, a psychological torture, an endless loop of silence where days blend into nights and a person can forget what it feels like to be seen. I used to talk to myself just to remember what my own voice sounded like when I was alone in my cell. There's a stigma and there's a self-worth struggle when you're in prison. Beyond the physical separation, there's another kind of loneliness, the loneliness of being unwanted by family, friends, and society. The stigma of incarceration means that even those who leave prison often find themselves unwelcome in the very world they long to return to. Jobs refuse them, friends disappear, families struggle to accept them. Society labels us by our worst mistake or our worst days. I was released in April 22, but I felt lonelier outside than I did inside. I couldn't get a job. No one around me wanted me. I had to start my own business, all because I was labelled an ex-offender. So what can be done to break the chains of loneliness? The solution is complicated, but there's also a simplicity to it, and that's a human connection. If we treat every person in prison as a human being rather than a prison number, we could change the way we experience incarceration, and more importantly, how they return to society. One of the key elements, as we've discussed, is strengthening family ties. Can we make them more affordable, make the calls more frequent, extend the time we can make those phone calls? When I was first in prison, my association was at 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock in the morning when all of my children were at school, so they were unavailable to me Monday to Friday. No one should have to choose between buying food in prison or calling their children. Phone and video access should be a right now and not a privilege for a few. Maybe more flexible visiting hours, making visit as easy for those with children to help keep those relationships thriving and alive. And family rebuilding programs, providing spaces for reconciliation and healing can mend broken bonds before it's too late. We've talked about creating purpose in prison. We've talked about education and work programs, giving people something meaningful to do, whether learning a new skill or contributing to the prison community. It gives you a sense of purpose. Peer mentorship, the work that Recoop does, and other support groups. No one understands prison loneliness like those who have lived it. Pairing people up in mentorship programs can create real connections, but also a bedrock of trust. Faith and cultural groups. I know my faith saves me. Spirituality and shared identity can be lifelines in places that often strip people of their sense of self. We've talked about the mental health battles. We need more access to counselling. I remember when I was in Pentonville, the family loss therapy group sort of pivoted me towards a journey where I could actually start to thrive in prison rather than survive. Sometimes just having someone to talk to without judgment can make all of the difference. We know the level of suicides is quite high in prisons. We need more prevention and emotional support networks, because no one should feel so alone that they believe their only escape in life is death. Reducing solitary confinement. Let's find alternative ways to isolation. People in solitary often leave worse off than they were before. We need humane alternatives that don't destroy a person's mind, but build their spirit. We talked about the Recoop buddy system for new prisoners. I've been an advocate that I was a first timer at 47. I knew nothing about prison. The buddy system for new prisoners, where somebody comes in and says, look, this is what your journey ahead is going to look like. These first few months are going to be the hardest. Pairing you with other newcomers, with supportive peer groups, can prevent them from slipping into despair. But also start preparing people for life after prison. Start building humans that don't exist at the moment. Programs that keep inmates connected to the outside world, whether it's through work release programs when they're in open conditions, or reintegration mentors, or partnership with businesses where the outside world comes into prisons. No one should leave prison with nothing and no one. We need to restore identity and dignity. People are not their past mistakes. They are fathers, they are mothers, they are brothers, sisters, artists, workers, and dreamers. Helping them see that and helping society see that changes everything, in my opinion. Because loneliness won't disappear if we just start saying to ourselves, we'll put people into categories where they're with other people or they're mixing with other people. Loneliness in prison isn't about just missing people. It's about missing yourself. For me, it's a slow, agonizing realization that the world outside is moving on without you. That birthdays are being celebrated in your absence, that children are growing up and seasons change, and yet you remain in the same place, unseen and unheard. It's waking up each day feeling like a shadow of the person you once were, questioning if anyone still remembers your name beyond the walls that confine you. Prison is supposed to be a place of punishment, but the deepest wound it inflicts is not often the loss of physical freedom. It's the loss of connection, the loss of identity, the feeling of becoming invisible to the world. And yet loneliness is not an inevitable part of justice. It is not a requirement for accountability or rehabilitation. It's not a price that must be paid for redemption. It is a failure of the prison system, a failure of humanity, and a failure of the belief that people are capable of change. But we can change that. If we stop seeing prisoners as numbers in a system and start seeing them as human beings, people with stories, with pain, with potential, we can break the cycle of loneliness. We can create a system that heals instead of harms, that builds instead of breaks, that restores instead of erases, because no one, no matter what they've done, should have a life sentence of being forgotten.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing your personal experience. It's really powerful, and you can see lots of people are commenting on that in the chat, and we rely a lot on lived experience now to shape the things that we do in HMPPS, and there's definitely quite a few things you said today that have kind of really made me think, and the idea of a reintegration mentor I find really interesting. So maybe in slightly longer time, I'll set up a call with you and have a conversation about some of that. So really, really powerful. I'm also grateful to you for being on silent at the beginning of your talk, because that means I'm not the only one who did that. And you've got a sign behind you that says, you're never fully dressed till you smile. And my jumper today says smile on it. So I feel like we've got a good friendship blooming here, Jazz. So but really, really powerful, and really brings it home. So thank you so much for that.